The strategic town of Sake is the latest in the eastern region to be affected by clashes. The Congolese armed forces said they repelled attacks launched by M23 rebels on army positions on Wednesday. A rocket was also reported to have landed near a university in the city of Goma on the same day. No casualties have been reported so far. The M23 group says they have no intention of seizing Goma despite their advance on Sake. Instead, the rebel group says they're ready for a peaceful solution if a monitored ceasefire is put in place. Meanwhile, thousands of people in Sake have been fleeing the violence and heading to Goma. As CGTN's Anastasia Barbero reports, some have been forcibly displaced several times already.
Elizabeth Rebecca hastily prepares a meal at this displacement camp in Sake, a town in the eastern province of North Kivu in the Democratic Republic of Congo. She's one of thousands of people forced to flee multiple times amid the latest fighting between rebels from the March 23 movement, army forces and self-defense groups.
It was on Friday that the war started. I was in the Shasa displacement camp near Karuba from where I had fled for the first time. When the clashes started last Friday in Shasa, I decided to keep fleeing. I am in Sake now and I am suffering. There is no food. There are no clothes. Everything we had brought from Karuba, we left it in Shasa. We don't have anything with us here.
Advances by the M23 have not only affected Sake, the unrest is pushing more people toward Goma, the capital of North Kivu. Many civilians who have largely borne the brunt of the violence have been uprooted from around the city as the situation worsens. Meanwhile, other residents affected in Masisi and Rutshuru territories have moved to safer areas on the outskirts of Goma. The United Nations is calling for increased security operations.
The level of attention to what is happening in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to be extremely high, and we are now determined to not only continue but to intensify the work. There is a worrying situation, particularly in North Kivu and Goma. We spoke with the governor about working together, in particular the coordination with the FARDC and the necessary coordination with the other actors, including the SADC force, which are currently being deployed.
The M23 made a major comeback in early 2022, sparking a conflict that has attracted various military interventions and mediation efforts. And as the turmoil unfolds, villages and towns continue to lose critical infrastructure as residents look to scrape together what's left for their survival. Anastasia Waweru for CGTN.
How far is the M23 willing to go in its offensive in eastern DRC? And can regional forces backing the nation's armed forces succeed in approaching this group? Here's an analysis from Richard Moncrief, a project director for the Great Lakes at the International Crisis Group.
The M23 really are trying to put a stranglehold on Goma to put pressure on the government in Kinshasa to accede to their demands. But they've also started in recent months to be more open about their desire to overthrow the government in Kinshasa. Now, they're a very long way from Kinshasa, of course, but they want to flex their muscles and demonstrate that they can almost take Goma, that's the capital of the North Kivu province, almost kind of take it hostage. I think that's really what's going on. Also, there's new troops arrived from Southern Africa recently in North Kivu province, and I think they wanted to flex their muscles and tell the troops from Southern Africa, who's boss in the area. The massive displacement crisis in Democratic Republic of Congo in general, one of the very biggest in the world, and it's one of the worst states of displacement in its history, which is a pretty awful fact. In North Kivu and around Goma specifically, there's been massive displacement for the last 2 years. By massive, I mean hundreds of thousands of people have had to flee their homes. And then just in the last 2 weeks, the M23 have been fighting the Congolese army and its allies around the town of Sake, which is around 30 kilometers from Goma. And much of the population of Sake fled the fighting and moved towards Goma. Some have actually gone back, even though the M23 appears at the moment to control Sake. They've gone back because, there's no room for them in Goma. their relatives' houses are already full or what have you. So some have actually gone back to live in areas controlled by the M23. Of course, many people do live in areas controlled by the M23. Now, what needs to be done? Well, first and foremost, there needs to be a diplomatic track and diplomatic pressure to try to resolve some of the diplomatic problems in the Great Lakes. A next step that is very necessary is that Kinshasa has to try to understand where the M23 are coming from and why these Congolese, because the M23 is largely Congolese, why these Congolese people are revolting, what do they want? And eventually, Kinshasa is probably going to need to talk to the M23. They did 3 or 4 years ago, and it'll probably end up there at some point in the future. And so it would be good to start to think about those talks and cut out some of the bloodshed between now and then. Also, obviously, there's a huge humanitarian need and a very large number of displaced people. Some people are very worried because the UN force is preparing to withdraw. So who will protect the camps of displaced people? That's a very great concern. It doesn't look like troops from Southern Africa are really equipped for that task. So that's a really great concern in the humanitarian community. So what can the Southern African troops do? Well, they must participate in protecting Goma, potentially protecting displacement camps and possibly camps for where the M23 may go in the event of a peace process. That could be an important element as well. But generally, they need to be there to signal that other countries in Africa find the actions of the M23 unacceptable and to therefore contribute to diplomatic pressure.
The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, says the UN will provide logistical and operational support to troops from the Southern African Development Community in the Democratic Republic of Congo to help quell the unrest in the east. The senior UN official, who was on a week-long visit to the country, also called on M23 rebels to immediately cease hostilities. Our correspondent Chris Ochamringa has more from the capital, Kinshasa.
The senior UN official was in the DRC to discuss the withdrawal of UN peacekeepers from the country by the end of this year. Jean-Pierre Lacroix met with the DRC president, provincial authorities and the commander of the Southern African Development Community in the east of the DRC. According to an agreement signed by the Congolese government and the UN, the peacekeepers are supposed to withdraw from the DRC in 3 phases, starting with South Kivu province. But the departure of the force known as MONUSCO comes amid increasing violence between government forces and the M23 rebels in North Kivu province. The head of the UN peace operations said they're supporting the government and the Southern African troops to restore peace in that region.
The MONUSCO force is working closely with other troops deployed in the east of the DRC, like the Congolese army and the SADC forces, to protect the region of Goma. We have deployed many soldiers to ensure that we coordinate our efforts to protect the city and the civilians as best as we can.
Earlier this year, the DRC Army announced the start of joint operations with troops from South Africa, Malawi and Tanzania, who make up the Southern African Development Community's contingent deployed to help fight the M23 rebels in eastern DRC. The rebels have captured several territories in North Kivu province since 2021. They recently issued a statement warning the SADC troops that the attacks targeting their forces will be dealt with at the source. The fighting has gotten closer to towns near the eastern city of Goma and forced hundreds of people to flee their homes. The DRC president has ruled out calls for talks with the M23 rebels until Rwandan troops that are reported to be backing them leave his country. Rwanda has repeatedly denied the accusation and said it's ready to defend itself in case it's attacked. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.